Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third session of Mistress of Philosophy. So, we left a question hanging there in the last time, and this was a question about what is Indian philosophy. The two parts to this question that I would like to talk about today. The first part is what is Indian about Indian philosophy? And the second question is what is philosophy or philosophical about Indian traditions? Now, there are two different answers to this question, and last time I suggested a preposterous idea that Indian philosophy is perhaps a post colonial construct. Now, the reason I said that is not because I want to make a political point, or perhaps I do subversively, but I think the reason I'm saying that is because the classification of what counts as philosophy or Indian philosophy is not in the hands of the people who produce this knowledge of philosophy. Shankaracharya did not come up and say, I want to be taught as Indian philosophy. Neither did Ramanuja. Basavanna is not even in the standing sometimes. So when we say Indian philosophy, we generally refer to a tradition of Brahminical Sanskritic texts being taught in a lot of institutions today as philosophy. A sort of compilation of these philosophies was done by some people in the medieval ages and in the classical ages called sangrahas, Shad Darshana Sangraha and Darshana Sangraha, and so on and so forth. This attempt is to try and bring these various diverse philosophies under one umbrella. So, if we ask the question, what is Indian philosophy? I would like to give you an anecdotal example of this. Because Indian philosophy, the word Indian doesn't quite capture the various diversities of the philosophies that come under it, or the diversities of the ways of thinking that can come under it. When I was traveling for a conference, workshop, and training program in Exeter University during my PhD days, we all went off on a trip to Salisbury, which is where the famous film Harry Potter was filmed. But Salisbury is more important for another thing. The Magna Carta is sitting there in a church museum. So me and my friend, who were sort of more civics inclined, went off to see this while the other people went shopping in the market. So my friend suddenly found something of interest. She was an art student and she wanted to look at some paintings, and she said, I'll meet you here. And then I started to walk in towards the Magna Carta. A very nice British old lady came up to me and very kindly said, I'm going to imitate her now, not as fun, but just the kind of terse, beautiful English that they spoke was kind of forever imprinted in my mind. And she said, my dear, you look Arabic, but do you speak Arabic? Because I have a pamphlet in Arabic explaining the museum to you. There's a problem with the people of the older world, because they think if you don't understand English, if you speak English very slowly, very clearly, somehow the language will penetrate the person who doesn't understand a word of that language, and they will understand. Then I told her, no, I'm not Arabic, I'm Indian. And then she suddenly, her face fell and she said, I am so sorry, but we do not have any pamphlets in Indian. We have French, we have German, we have Chinese, we even have Japanese, but we have no pamphlets in Indian. She said it in such a patronizing way that I was so upset. But she was a very, very old lady. I mean, perhaps in her late 80s. So I didn't want to offend her, but I was also very irritated with this talking down to which I perceived in her tone of voice. Then I said, ma'am, there is no Indian. There's Gujarati, Marathi, Telugu, Bengali, And I rattled off a couple of languages then and there, like a list, and said, these are all the languages that are spoken in India and they are Indian. There is no one Indian language. And obviously, you do not have a pamphlet even in a single Indian language. But I speak the Queen's English, so I will do with an English brochure. Her face brightened up and said, my dear, you speak perfect English, the Queen's English. May I compliment you? And then she gave a bright smile and gave me a brochure. I didn't have the heart to say anything more, and I quietly walked away from there. This was like my first encounter with the colonial mindset, if you want to call it that. There is an assumption about things that the colonizers felt about those that they colonized, that they were intellectually in some way not equal to, or they were a mystery for the people who encountered them. So there were two responses to this East-West encounter. The first response was the response of wonder. All the people who managed to learn the translations of the Sanskritic texts were like the wonder that was India. Basham has written a book like that. There was this whole ancient tradition and fantastic philosophical texts. There were texts on love and on economics. There were texts that were written with commentaries, extensive texts showing beauty of language, of thought, of literature, of poetry, of drama. And suddenly the West was in touch with this wondrous Sanskritic Brahminical tradition of texts. The other texts followed soon after, because as they discovered like Telugu texts or Urdu poetry or even Persian poetry, or the wonder just grew. But it grew as if a parent would look at its child and say, oh, what a wonderful drawing you've done. It was a very smile saying that, oh, children, you're getting there. Oh, philosophers of India, you're getting there. You're not quite there. So this kind of attitude perhaps needed us to be classified. If they discovered philosophical thinking in our thought, maybe they needed to keep us out, and maybe they created this notion of Indian philosophy or philosophy from India. But on the other hand, our own people during a nationalistic struggle wanted to establish themselves as being equal to those who were abroad or our colonizers. So there were many educated Indians who embarked on the project of proving to these people who believed that Indians had no rational thought, that we did have rational thought. We had forms of epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, and we are still in that project to a large extent. The kinds of books and the kinds of papers we write are still within this project of fitting in with the philosophy. In the recent years, I've come to a realization. Of course, my professor mentor, Dr. Sarukai, always keeps saying this, but then it takes time for you to actually experience this. The experience of this is that there is an analogy that I can use to explain this. It's fun, but think of it this way. When we talk about Indian food, we know how variety of food and different types of snacks that come under the label Indian food. We are okay with all of them, and we include all of them, whether it's a chapati from the north or dosa from the south, or whether it is the kejri sabji from the Rajasthan ends, or the northeastern goat curry, right? All of them are different kinds of food that are included in the in Indian food. But supposing we were invited to a table of a potluck party, and the condition was that we are going to now call things food. We're going to give them the label food. And the only kind of things that can be called food are the ones that can be eaten with a fork and a spoon. So you bring all your food along. And so we Indians carry all the food from all parts of our country. Delicious sweets, biryani, the chapati, all of it is being carried to these people. And we sit at the table, and the knife and the fork fits certain kinds of dishes. Yet other dishes, like the chapati and the dosa, do not fit that table. So they become things to eat, but they're not food. What gets classified as the food are the ones that have a capacity to be eaten with a knife and a fork. And then they say, this is Indian food. How would you feel? Obviously, you're going to reject that whole classification. We will reject that classification for food, for Indian food, but we will not reject that classification for Indian philosophy, because what gets selected as Indian philosophy is a particular tradition of texts, Brahminical hegemonic texts, that seem to indicate a certain similarity with philosophy in the West. That means the definition of philosophy, just like in the dining table, the definition of food is given by fork and spoon. The definition of philosophy itself is given by a certain thinking, a certain cultural tradition, which places rationality or textual traditions or hermeneutics above all others. So phenomenological kind of experience may not get recorded as philosophy. Poetry will not be included in philosophy. So if you write philosophy like poetry, it may not get into the philosophical. If there is a largely political project, it may not get included in the philosophy. Or if you try to fit in your philosophy into their food, into their philosophy, it will not get accepted. In fact, so many times in my paper, when I mixed up Indian philosophical thought with Western philosophical thought, I was told, please keep the Indian philosophical thought as a separate section. Excuse me. So Indian philosophical thought has to match up to the Western philosophical thought so that they can sit at the same table and be called philosophy. This is a big problem, and I want you to think about this. What is Indian about Indian philosophy? Please put in your comments below and subscribe to my channel if you have already not done so. Every week I'll be posting 2 videos on the topic, and I welcome a discussion on these topics. Please go check out A.K. Ramanujan's Indian way of thinking as a kind of reading for this background. Thank you.